I got a little surprise video for you guys here. I'm calling it Surprised by Chance. And I'm going to run through this thing the best way that I remember it. Back in '83, when I was working on a lot of Volkswagen Rabbits at the Volkswagen dealer up here, when we still had one in this town, we did a lot of valve adjustments, and it required these tools. You know, you had the shims that you had to put under there, and it was just something that we did fairly regularly. Now, on the Toyotas, you're going to see these kind of where you're basically, each one of these between there and the top has got a different measurement. So if you pull the camshafts off a Toyota to do valve stem seals or something, and you pull all of the those followers out, you need to set them on the bench in the order that you pulled them out, so you can put them back in there and make sure nobody's over messing with your stuff. But on the Volkswagen, it was a different way. We had these little cam follower that went up and down in here, and this is the valve stem there. I drew this with paint, so bear with me. All right, so that cam follower slides up and down in there as this lobe turns over. And what we would do is get our go, no-go feeler gauges and shoot under there with these lobes up, and we would see if they were within spec. If they weren't, we'd put a thicker shim or a thinner shim to get them in spec. And so that sounds pretty simple. Now, if you hadn't done those a lot, it might take you a while and it might be intimidating, but these weren't really that hard to do. One of the camshafts lobe rides on the shim. You had to use these little tools here, and you could still buy these. These pliers took the shim out. That right there pushed the cam follower down. And after you got used to using them, you could do the whole job in about 30 minutes. Well, I drew a ticket on a diesel Rabbit one day that was a routine job, but it turned nasty. Whenever I checked it, all the valves were really loose, and I had to put shims in there that were a lot thicker than I was used to having to put in there. And that was really crazy. It was really loose, and everything was fine when the engine was warm, but when the guy came to start it up, every time one of those cam followers would go down, it would stick on the carbon that was in there because they were going deeper than they ever had. I don't know how they got so loose. And they would stick for a second until the piston came up and bumped the valve, and then it would click shut, and it was making a clankety clank noise when he was spinning it over cold. He threw a screaming fit. Okay, so I had some choices right here. I could tear everything down at my own expense, clean the oil varnish from the cam follower bores, but this guy wasn't about to pay for that repair, and I knew I'd be doing it on my own time. So it was his problem, really, but he was trying to make it my problem. But I could put the valves loose like they were when they came in and send him on his way because it didn't run bad anyway. And I decided to do that. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I stepped on a circumstantial landmine. That's what I call that. All right, so my dad, when he was running his shop in the 1960s, he used to say that when he worked on a Corvair, he had to do it with the shop doors closed because if somebody saw him working on one, they'd bring him another one, and he didn't want another one, which that's kind of funny to me. Anybody that's worked on a Corvair might understand that. Now, most of the guys like these, these Ford probes. When they first came out in 1989, it was a better car, I think, than it was whenever they went to this body style here. This was a '93 model, and so this was a really adventuresome thing. And a lot of people don't know it, but the probe almost replaced the Mustang. Now that would have been a mess, wouldn't it? So there was a bunch of customers that wrote angry letters to Ford, and they put the quietus on that, and Ford went back to making the regular Mustang, and the probe died in 1997, if I remember right. Okay, so this one here, Joe brought this probe to us with an inoperative air conditioner and a dead charging system. So I opened the hood, and this thing had tossed its outboard serpentine belt. But the second belt, the inboard one that drives the other stuff, was still in place. Now, this belt here was the one that he had lost. He lost his charging, he lost his AC. But the other belt was still on there, and it was pulling the water pump and all, power steering. This right here is what had happened. That balancer had come apart, and the outer side of that pulley had come off. That happens. I had never seen it happen quite like this. He had picked this up out of his driveway. And so I said, well, we'll need to put a balancer on this one. And so we went to work doing that. It looked like it'd be a simple repair, so a replacement balancer was easy to get, so we had to work our puller in there to get the old one off, and we managed to do that. And there's a new balancer there with that, it's together with that rubber in between the inner and the outer parts of it, like balancers do. And so I looked at the part of the timing belt I could see, whenever we got the thing off of there, to see if it maybe had a crappy cracked timing belt, but it looked like a new timing belt. So anyway, I said, I'm going to go ahead and put this thing back on there. We're going to tighten it up really good and tight so that this surface here is pinched against the timing gear. Now the reason that's important, if you don't run that crank gear into where it's pinched against that, run this boss on the crankshaft right here. Alright, the boss on the crankshaft right here, the pulley's out here, the way I drew that. That's got to be pushed in so that the keyway locates it, but that key is not strong enough to carry the load of that crankshaft pulling those camshafts all the time. If you don't tighten this up good, it can shear that key and get it out of time, and then you do have a problem. Now I've seen that on some V8 Broncos and stuff where somebody worked on it in their yard and they just tightened the balancer with a ratchet as tight as they could get it so the belt would work, but they didn't have it pinching that gear. The crank gear would shear the key, and then the crank would get ahead of the cam, and you'd have low vacuum and all kinds of other stuff. Alright, if the balancer is not properly tightened, it's like I'm showing there, it's got to be tightened up so that it pinches that gear between the boss on the cam. This will be the crank gear, but I didn't go to the trouble to draw all those teeth in there. This gear here would be this here. That's got to be pinched against that really good and tight. The torque specs on those are pretty strong. Alright, so the new belts were installed. We put the splash shield and the tire back on it, fired it up, backed it out of the shop, and it ran good. So I said, I didn't see any point in test driving it. We weren't really working on it for a running problem. Well, this guy got in this car when he came to pick it up, and he went about 100 yards, and he was just sitting there, and it died on him. So we had to push it back up there, but it spun and spun and spun, but it just wouldn't do it. It acted like it wanted to start. You know, it's kind of like if it had a distributor, you would maybe advance the timing a little bit or something. Anyway, this one here would need to be, we actually, when it was puffing smoke and all, we found a crack in that we hadn't even looked for earlier. But we wanted to know what made the engine do that. We checked the fuel pressure, it was 40 pounds. We checked the fuel quality and spark, they were just fine. Why was it firing like it had cross plug wires? After all, he had driven it over there, and all we had done was take the belt off, put a balancer on it, put it back together. Hadn't done anything to the ignition system. Well, the crankshaft tone wheel was on the balancer we had just replaced, and the crank sensor was so close to our work, we pulled the right front wheel and splash shield again to see if maybe we had disturbed the crank sensor, or maybe it damaged it somehow or whatever. That wasn't what was going on this time though. So with the timing covers pulled off to the point where we could see the marks, and the cam pulley marks aren't easy to find or figure out without an illustration, by the way, we determined the timing belt wasn't the problem because all the marks were perfectly lined up. We lined up the cam marks, and the crank mark was lined up. That's what I like to do when I'm working on one. I like to line the camshafts up, and when the camshafts are lined up, if everything's right, the crank will be lined up. Now the camshafts, if you just line up the crank mark and look at the cam marks, they may be 180 out, so you got to be watching that. Anyway, since the crank pulley mark and the cam gear marks were lined up, the engine was obviously on #1 TDC compression. But what about the distributor? If it was firing out of time, there was something going on in that area, but what would that be all about? Well, the distributor is driven by the exhaust camshaft on this one, so why don't we pull the distributor cap and see where the rotor's pointing while we've got these marks lined up. So with the cap off and the position of #1 firing post noted marked, we found the rotor was pointing at #6. We were closing in on our problem. Now we got to figure out how this took place. Now with the rotor pointing at 6, and this one turns counterclockwise when seen from this angle. The reason it turns counterclockwise when you're looking at it from that angle is because on the other end is where the camshaft is, and the camshaft gears and the belts and all that stuff, if they're on the right side of the car, the engine will actually turn the same way the car rolls. So if only some of these Honda Civics and stuff and some of these Mitsubishis that's got the engine pointing the opposite direction, it's still going to turn the way the car rolls, but the engine will be an engine that spins counterclockwise instead of clockwise. Looking at the back of this engine, it spins counterclockwise. Only one thing I could think of that made sense of how this thing got out of time. See, we had moved that far. Alright, the cam gear bolt was loose, and the engine died when the gear spun ahead and left its shaft and the distributor behind, and that caused the crossfire and ignition, and the engine stalled. Now, if we'd impact wrenched on the bolt down there, did we jiggle this and loosen it up or what? Because we hadn't even worked up here whenever we were doing our original work. Now, there's a pin right here That's what the probe uses to locate the cam gear exactly where it's supposed to be in relation to the shaft. All right, and that's that little knock pin they call it. Well, that pin wasn't even there. I don't know what happened to it. Somebody that put a timing belt on it must have lost it, or put the cam gear on there wrong and pushed it back. I don't know what happened to it. It was just not there. And said whenever they did it, they got it lined up like it was supposed to be and tightened the bolt really tight to keep it in its shaft aligned. And a little bit of jiggling comes loose anyway. That's not a good idea. But he'd been driving it a long time like that. Now the four banging brother of this little V6 uses the bolts to keep the camshaft and the gears married. They don't even have a knock pin or anything else. You can just, what you do is you get them lined up, you line it up with this tool back here, going through the slots in that shaft, and then whenever you, with the camshafts in time, then basically you're going to line these up, get the marks like they're supposed to be on there, and then buckle them down really good and solid. And that's basically the flatness holds that. And it's very similar to this on a Ford 4-liter Explorer single overhead cam. They don't have any keyways or knock pins or anything either. All right, so we opted to find the sweet spot on the cam boss where the gear needed to be. Let the torque of the bolt hold the gear the way it does on a 4-liter and a 4-cylinder Z-Tech, but how did we find the sweet spot? Well, I used an old Jeep 4-liter rotor alignment trick to decide where the camshaft should be in relation to the cam gear. It was pretty easy to do, understanding what I did about that. On the old 4-liters, what we needed to do, these had a cam sensor in the distributor, but they had a crank sensor that determined timing. All this was the cam sensor. If you don't have this lined up properly, you're going to have bucking and jumping going down the road when the timing gets up to about 50 degrees before top dead center, like when you're cruising. Because that rotor alignment has got to be, when you set it the right way, when it's on number 1 top dead center 0, you're going to have this distributor set so that rotor is just passing that number 1 post. That way, whenever it's up at that 50-degree TDC I was talking about, the firing window will be right there. It'll be on either side of that. Now, if you've got this aligned wrong, whenever it gets to 50 degrees top dead center, it'll jump back and hit a different post. And so there you go. What we decided to do was set this probe up the same way we would if it was an old Jeep, since we were working on it the way we were. All right, so already went over that, and the trick worked. We torqued the camshaft bolt to the 100 foot-pounds and slid the valve cover back on it, and it ran smooth and quiet. So one of those moments when I heard it fire up and purr. We didn't bend any valves, and so we were in good shape on that. I was kind of afraid that we were going to bend valves to start with. Well, old Joe was good to go. Now we're going to hit you with some questions like we usually do. What is the term that describes the place indicated on this valve opening chart? Just about anybody that does much of any engine work at all will understand what that, will know what it is. All right, here's a true story. Service advisor brings a customer to talk to you about a problem they're having with his truck. You hadn't worked on it, you hadn't looked at it. You make an educated guess as to the cause of the concern. The customer is a jerk and he calls you an SOB and says he's not going to have you experimenting on his truck. So how do you react? This actually happened to me. I didn't even know this guy. I hadn't worked on his truck or anything. All right, you come up for a repair order that's really tough. It's a job you don't want to do, not because it doesn't pay well, but just because it's a really tough job and you were hoping for some gravy. What should you do? Complain to the service manager? Go home for the day? Man up to the job and beat book time, or tell the customer his car is a piece of junk? When faced with several simultaneous component failures on a vehicle, you should A, replace all the components and close the ticket. B, try to find out what killed them all. C, talk to the service advisor or customer and attempt to determine if all the failures happened at once, or both B and C. If the outer part of a harmonic balancer slips, A, the timing marks may not be dependable, B, the crank sensor might be damaged, C, the belt might wear unevenly, or D, any of the above. Question 6. When a failure occurs right after you worked on a customer's ride, you should A, get mad, B, tell the customer it wasn't your fault even before you look at it, C, find out what happened and be honest if you were at fault, or D, tell a lie. Question number 7. Induction backfire is always caused by A, crossed spark plug wire, B, cam timing, C, lean misfires, D, none of the above. Question number 8. If you don't have a cylinder hone and you do engine work, you should A, find somebody who will loan you one whenever you need it, B, use sandpaper, C, don't worry about honing the cylinders, or D, buy a good hone. On an inline 4-cylinder engine, you can find number 4 top dead center exhaust stroke by A, lining up the timing marks, B, finding TDC compression on number 2, C, finding valve overlap on number 1, or D, none of the above. Question 10. The best kind of job is one where you A, earn your money with all your smarts and skills, B, can sit around and play on your phone all day and get fat, dumb, and happy, C, don't have to show up for work unless you feel like it, D, will get laid off whenever oil prices drop. Alright, let's go back to number 1. And we will whip through these things and see what we can do here. Alright, let's go to 1. This is overlap. Just about everybody watching this video probably already knew that. What I told this guy, the service writer was standing there with him, and when that guy said what he said, and what he was asking me about, he says, my gas tank, my rear fuel tank fills up sometimes while I'm driving. And I says, okay. In other words, it pumps gas out of the front tank into the rear one. And I says, well, if I was going to guess at one of those, I would say it was the tank switching valve, because that's usually what's wrong with it. And that's when the guy said, well, you SOB, I'm not going to have you experimenting on my truck. And so I just basically told the service advisor, I said, get this guy out of here because I'm through talking to him. And we didn't work on that guy's truck. He went somewhere else. Fine with me. I didn't want to work on his truck anyway. All right, you come up for a repair order. Obviously, now I worked with a guy that did this. He drew it. It was at that same Volkswagen place I talked about earlier. He drew a job on one of those 73 Volkswagen buses that had the Porsche engine in it that needed a crank seal. And he didn't want to do the job. So he got in his car and went home. And the service manager gave it to me, and I had to do it. All right, when you're faced with several simultaneous component failures on a vehicle, you need to try to find out what killed them. You know, if a bunch of stuff dies all at the same time, they may be connected to one another or they may not, but you need to find out what's going on. Talk to the service advisor. Did one thing fail and then another until a bunch of them had died, or did you notice all these at the same time? It's just one of those things where you got to get more information, but you need to try to find out what killed them. All right, here's an any of the above thing. The crank sensor might be damaged. I've seen that on an Explorer. The belt might wear unevenly. That happens too because it'll be out of line. The timing marks may not be dependable. If it turns and the timing mark is on the part that turns, you may not have dependable timing marks. All right, what you need to do is find out what happened and be honest if you were at fault. Everybody that's ever turned a wrench and worked on cars has been in this guy's shoes. Has actually looked when you see the thing coming back and you say, oh my gosh, I just could have sworn I had that fixed, you know. Induction backfire is not always caused by any of these, but it can be caused by any of them. So that's the reason this one here is none of the above, is because always is in there. Anytime you see a question that's got always or never or something like that in there, it's always a suspect question. Listen to me, I said always, didn't I? But anyway, none of the above. If you don't have a cylinder hone and you do engine work, what should you do? You should find somebody that, no, you don't do that. You're going to buy a good cylinder hone. I was working with a guy named Donnie, and I've worked with a bunch of guys named Donnie, so this wasn't the same Donnie I talk about a lot of other times. And this was a scraggly bearded guy, and he talked like a hillbilly and all that. Of course, I talk like a hillbilly too. And he was over there rooting around in somebody else's toolbox. And I said, what are you doing in Philip's toolbox? And he said, I'm looking for his cylinder hone. And I said, well, why don't you have a cylinder hone? You're an engine mechanic. He said, my brother borrowed my cylinder hone and he didn't give it back. And I said, well, why don't you get your brother by the beard and jerk him around? He said, how'd you know my brother had a beard? Well, I couldn't imagine his brother not having a beard. Anyway, on an inline 4-cylinder engine, you can find number 4 top dead center by lining up the timing marks. Why? You're on number 1 compression, and this is a 4-cylinder, And number 1 and 4 are companions, so when one's on compression, 4's on exhaust. I used to get my engine guys, whenever we were studying, I'd tell them, have an engine on the stand out there with the valve cover off and the timing marks where you'd see them. And I would tell them, I need you to find number 4 top dead center exhaust. And they'd crank around looking at the valves and all that stuff, and they'd say, huffing and puffing, okay, okay. And I'd say, okay, now you need to find number 1 top dead center compression. And they go through the same rigmarole again, and they'd say, okay, how did I do? I say, you make a C. Why did I make a C? I says, because all you needed to do is line the timing marks up. You worked too hard. Okay. Question 10. Best kind of job you do is where you earn your money with your smarts and skills. You want to be the last person they decide to lay off, even if they're going to get rid of everybody else. One time I put this guy to work at a place down close to the Florida line. And he was a really, really smart, hard-working guy. And he worked there for 3 months. And after he worked there for 3 months, the guy that owned the place fired everybody but him. And one of the people the owner of the place fired was his own daughter. And he told this guy that I had put down there, he says, you and me can run this place. We don't need anybody else. And whenever Christmas time came that year, he bought that guy a brand new toolbox from Lowe's, a great big fine one, you know, that had a radio in it and all. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. You didn't get to see a lot of my face, and I know that was a disappointment because you guys just love looking at me. But I'm going to upload this video now, and I hope you all enjoy it.